Before we hear the two amazing narrations, let's appreciate our dear Queen of Horror, Danny Dreadful, and the next big thing in our community, Nightmares Nightly, who both narrated these stories. Also, a new sensation is on the rise in this community called Weeping Willow, and I will be a guest on his new video in Dead by Daylight. Check them all out and subscribe to them via link below. I'm afraid your fate is sealed. Now let's begin your dissection.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Nightmares Nightly. It happens the same every year. All the houses in the neighborhood don their yards with skeletons and spooky lighting, carved pumpkins, paper cutouts of bats. They dress the properties up with just as much enthusiasm as the kids in their costumes, all for the sole purpose of basking in the spirit of Halloween. The house 2 doors down always goes all out. Strobes, inflatables, artificial fog, the whole 9 yards. It attracts kids from all across town, serving as some kind of meeting point for the trick-or-treaters. With pillowcases slung over their shoulders and plastic jack-o'-lanterns in their hands, they start their proud march. Every princess and zombie trying to get the biggest haul of their life. Every year I turn off the lights and pretend I'm not home, sitting in front of the TV with my dog for the annual marathon of slasher films. I'm a bit of a Scrooge at this time of year. I don't really decorate my house. I don't even pass out candy. The street bustles with the combination of laughter and screams, each child and teenager trying to make each year more memorable than the last. From the darkness of my home, I catch glimpses from the window when the commercial breaks. Everything seems festive and normal, all except the house across the street. I didn't notice it at first. The house across the street is abandoned, almost a derelict at this point. It was a modest loft house before it went unkempt, with a little garage and a big stretch of porch to walk up before you hit the front door. There's a rocking chair on one side of the door, and a window on the other. I imagine it would have been a nice setup back in the day. Nice fall day, sip some cider on the covered porch in the rocker, hear the television from the open window. Now, the windows are boarded up, and the garage door sits lopsided on its hinges, and there's so many old twigs and leaves matted on the porch roof, it looks like it'll cave at any moment. The rocking chair sits empty, dust and mold collecting over the years. No one's lived there for a long time. I don't even think it's on the market. It remains its old, weathered self all year round, and everything seems fine. But as trick-or-treating comes to a close, that changes. I have it narrowed down to the last 20 minutes. Every year from 5 to 7, the kids go up and down the street raising hell, hopped up on sugar and the Halloween spirit. The old house stays dark and quiet almost the whole time, but at 6:40, that porch light kicks on. In the flickering light, a little orange bowl appears in front of the door. A few feet away, the rocking chair is no longer empty. There's a clown sitting there. His getup is crude and old, like an alcoholic uncle threw on a cheap jester one-piece. The eyes are closed, but the eyelids are painted. Cartoonish eyes staring at you while it sits perfectly still. A rusty kitchen knife held in a frozen hand. A little paper sign is stuck to the door, and in big red letters it reads, "Take 1." I've never seen anybody physically set it up. It's just there. 1 minute it's dark and the next the light is on. It's almost like someone ran up when you weren't looking and propped the stuff up as a gag. But I've never caught anybody, never seen anybody in the act. It just happens. The thing is, that little orange bowl, it's loaded to the top. Not with dollar store candy either. King-size bars. The first time, I thought maybe the property owner was trying to give back for having such an eyesore year-round. Or maybe a homeless guy was trying to have a little fun. Scare the kids. That sort of thing. But it shows up every year. and it's exactly the same every time. The same scuzzy clown, the same candy bowl, and the same written sign. The most unsettling thing is the window by the door. All year the windows in the house are boarded up, but when that light kicks on, that window opens. No boards, no nothing. The faded drapes on the inside sway in the night breeze, but that's all you can see. It's pitch black when you look in there. There's just that damn clown with his painted eyelids in the open window. People started to go missing. Articles in the paper would show the next day. Some kid or teenager wouldn't make it home after going door to door looking for candy. Every year, without fail, there would be a new face to look out for. I would think of the house across the street immediately, but the strange thing is, I seem to be the only one to see it. The porch light, the clown, the bowl of bars. I talked to some of the neighbors, and everyone thinks I'm crazy. It got to the point to where I called the police. I was sure they'd kick down that door, find a body or at least some kind of evidence. Maybe bones or clothing, something. I called them twice. Twice they came out and they searched the whole damn house. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. No human remains, murder weapon, not even footprints. Like nobody has been there in ages. They tell me the next time I cry wolf, I'll get a ticket. And this year, at 6:40, I watch from the window. The light kicks on, and they're there. Clown, bowl, paper sign, open window. I see some kids coming down the street, both dressed as animatronics. They look tired and ready to go, but they see the light and they go to the door. They see the giant bars and jump with excitement. They read the sign, then look at the clown, and they wait for the jump scare. But he just sits there with a knife held limp and a black painted stare. Each of them pick out one, but there's a longing as they look to the bowl. It seems like their conscience gets the better of them, and they leave without succumbing to greed. Heading off the porch, they pass a teen in a hoodie and skull face paint. He pushes past rudely, almost knocking over one of the kids. They seem upset, but they don't look back. They don't notice the clown behind them. The painted lids raise, revealing staring, bloodshot eyes. This year, I pass out candy. I turn on my light, and I'm out with my own bowl, waving the kids over, waving them to safety. The eyes of the clown look at me menacingly, like a warning, but it doesn't last long. The teenager is stuffing the bars in his pockets, as many as he can hold. I show the kids my bowl of suckers, tell them the haul's over, to take as much as they want. They're ecstatic, too happy and focused to look back at the slowly standing clown. The teenager leaves, and arms of nothing but bone shoot through the open window. One grabs his arm, the other planting a hand over his mouth to silence. The clown is there in an instant, eyes wild, the knife digging deep, stabbing over and over. The kids take handful after handful. I show them the silly paint I put on, and if I have to, I'll ask them about their costumes. The teenager fights, but it's over just as soon as it started. The clown stabs and rips, the old blade eviscerating crudely. The arms are already pulling him in. His screams blend with others in the distance. My eyes tear up, and the kids get worried. I dump the candy in their bags, trying to stay joyous. My hands are shaking, but I play it off. I call my dog to the front door so they can see the silly spider costume I made him wear. Their laughter drones out what they don't want to hear. The clown grabs the teenager by the ankles, and the skeletal arms help, pushing him into the dark, abandoned house. He leaves the knife sticking from the torso, arterial blood staining his ratty costume. When the feet are sucked in, he slams the window shut. For a moment, he looks at me, His stare is cold and terrifying, but I don't look for too long. Across the street, the porch light shuts off, and it's all gone. I still feel the eyes on me, but there's nothing there. Other houses seem to take it as their cue, and one by one, trick-or-treating comes to an end. The kids grin with their heavy bags and wave goodbye, going back the way they came. I'm left at the front door, and the air is suddenly cooler. I look at the porch ahead, and I almost swear I can see him still sitting there in the dark. But when a car passes, the headlights show an empty chair. I take my empty bowl and shoo my dog inside, realizing I'll either have to do this again or move. I still have some time to figure it out. Until next year, happy Halloween. Thanks for listening, everybody. And if you like what I'm doing and want to hear more, hit that subscribe button for more Nightmares Nightly.
Death has followed me from a young age. I have experienced so much loss that even the psychologists I've seen to try and deal with the magnitude of grief that I live with on a daily basis agree that it's an abnormal amount. I get the sense that some people think I'm lying when I tell them I lost my mom, my grandparents, and my best friend all within 4 years of each other, starting at age 11. I understand that it seems a bit too fantastical to be true, but if you could see me, you would understand that it's no lie. The effects of such forceful grief are etched into my face, into the way I hold myself, into the sound of my voice. I barely had time to catch my breath for years on end. Fatigued from years of grieving, I drifted through life in a fog. I graduated high school and watched my peers find their passions, while I remained listless and afraid of death, which seemed ready and waiting round every corner to pop out at me. It didn't have much to propel me forward, as I mentioned before. I avoided close relationships, and thus there was nobody in my life pushing me to achieve anything post-graduation. At that point, I wasn't very close with my family either. My anxiety surrounding death had managed to alienate me from almost everyone I cared about. At a certain point, however, my mindset changed. Instead of turning and running as fast as I could from death, I stopped, spun on my heels, and looked it straight in the eye, which is how I ended up attending mortuary school. As soon as I began to consider it as a career, it seemed like the perfect fit, like the perfect answer to all my anxieties. At the funeral home, I never had to form any bonds because it was always a steady stream of goodbyes. As an embalmer, I rarely had to even interact with another living person. I spent my days quietly tending to the bodies that came into my care, and I was thankful for the solitude. There, in an embalming room, I found myself surrounded by death, but never the one touched by it. For once, I was not the one grieving, but rather the one who watched others as they grieved. It was my reprieve, until Jane Doe came into my life. Let me stop and explain a moment, for legal purposes. I can only refer to her as Jane Doe. As an embalmer, I would be breaking the law if I told you her real name. Even if I wanted to, though, I wouldn't. Names hold a lot of power. Jane came to me in the typical fashion, by way of the body transport van. She was a nursing home casualty like many other cadavers I cared for. There was nothing unusual about her story. Her autopsy report noted she had likely passed in her sleep. No need to reconstruct her face or hide any wounds on her body. Her family requested very minimal makeup and light styling of her hair. Preparing to embalm Jane, I put on my usual protective gear: smock, gloves, respirator. Jane was already on the table. As I approached her, I took a moment to observe her before starting the process, as I do with every person that comes my way. My eyes made their way up her body, noting nothing out of the ordinary, and then my gaze came to rest upon her face. Jane's eyes were still open, as I hadn't yet glued them closed. Most bodies I saw had a very distinct deadness to their eyes. That's the only way I can think to describe it. Looking into their eyes had the same effect on me as looking into the glass eyes of a taxidermied animal. Jane's eyes, though, just for a moment, seemed to hold some light in them that I had only ever seen before in a living person. In that moment, I felt entranced by her eyes. I felt like I had just caught her waking up from a nap or something. As quickly as the moment came, it passed, and I decided to wrap up my assessment and get on with the process. I set to work washing Jane's body with disinfectant solution and wiring her jaw shut. The task came so simply to me after 2 years at the funeral home that I could practically do them on autopilot. I let myself zone out a little bit as I massaged her limbs to alleviate some of the stiffness that had set into her muscles. The only other step before the actual embalming process could start was gluing her eyelids shut. I began to turn around towards the countertop, ready to grab the glue I had set out, when I could swear I saw Jane blink. The feeling that washed over me in that moment was indescribable. My brain descended into a moment of sheer animalistic panic that had me clutching my chest with one hand and the edge of the counter with the other. There was no logical way that Jane could have just blinked. She was dead, for fuck's sake. They would not have brought me a person who was still alive. And yet, as I had begun to turn my head away from her, it really did look as though her eyelids flickered for the smallest moment. Could it not have been a trick of the lighting? I tried to reason with myself in my mind. The fluorescent lights in the embalming room did occasionally dim for a few seconds, causing my vision to momentarily distort. At this point, I had a white-knuckle grip on the edge of the counter as I attempted to get a hold of myself and slow my racing heart. It was definitely just the lights, I finally decided. I steeled myself down and slowly turned around again to face Jane, this time clutching the glue in my hands. I don't know what I expected to see when I turned back to the body. Maybe that it would be sitting up or dancing a jig. But it definitely wasn't what awaited me once I was facing her. She was exactly as she had been when I had observed her closely only minutes ago. Yep, definitely did, I thought, trying to shove down any creeping doubt. Inhaling deeply, I slowly brought my gaze to her eyes. They were just as lifeless as they looked before. I let out a nervous laugh, a short, sharp noise that sounded almost inhumane and nothing to soothe my nerves. I allowed myself to take one more moment standing next to Jane in silence before proceeding with the eyelid glue. It is the shortest part of the embalming process and was always the most satisfying to me. It was always somewhat of a relief to close the eyes. Cadaver eyes tend to be rather unsettling, theoretically, blinking or not. I could feel my hands tremble a bit as I carefully applied the glue and closed Jane's eyes. I felt much more relaxed looking at her now that her eyes were closed, and I could feel the lingering feelings of unease slowly leaving my body. I felt silly for being so scared in the first place, reminding myself that there was no logical way Jane could be alive. All bodies that came my way were absolutely, positively dead. I took a moment to double-check my glue work before disappearing into the closet off of the embalming room where the rest of my materials were. Now that I had set her jaw and closed her eyes, it was time to begin the actual process of removing Jane's blood and replacing it with embalming fluid. I gathered everything I needed and headed back into the embalming room. Upon entering, it felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. The panic I had felt before couldn't hold a candle to the sensation that was overcoming me. I felt like I was watching myself from somewhere above my body. I watched myself drop everything in my arms, not caring where the embalming fluid exploded from its container, all over the floor. I watched myself turn and run out of the room as quickly as I could possibly go. I couldn't feel my body. I was completely numb, and yet my brain was on fire. I must have screamed or made some other noise because I was soon face to face with the funeral director, Eric, who looked alarmed. Before he could say anything, I sank down to the floor and curled up, not caring how that might have looked. I was sure now that I was crazy, and there would be people there in an ambulance soon to take me away. I was sure of it because when I had walked back into the embalming room moments ago, Jane's eyes had been wide open when I just sealed them shut.